Greetings and welcome back. It's your host, Gabe Morales. We've been covering prison systems across the United States. The Michigan Department of Corrections oversees facilities as well as the parole and probation population within the state. It has jurisdiction over 26 prisons and a special alternative incarceration program, together comprising of approximately 33,000 prisoners. The agency headquarters are located in Lansing, and the current director is Heidi E. Washington. The department has 4 general population security levels, whereby prisoners are classified as Level 1, Level 2, Level 4, or Level 5. Prisoner security classifications are based on the confinement and management needs of each prisoner rather than solely by their conviction. During the individual's time in prison, their classification and location may change during reclassification based on conduct and other factors. I will only cover high and maximum security levels 4 and 5 in this video. The Michigan State Prison, also called the Jackson Prison, was the first facility within the state, approved in 1839 and built by 1842. A larger prison was added in 1926 and opened in 1934. It was the largest walled prison in the world, housing nearly 6,000 prisoners at the time. It was reorganized into 4 separate prisons in 1988. One of the 4 prisons, JMF, was used until 2007, while others still remain in operation. The Macomb Correctional Facility was opened in 1993 and has 11 major and 2 minor buildings. It houses Level 1, 2, and 4. With a total capacity of 1,416 inmates. The Chippewa Correctional Facility operates Level 4 and Level 2 units, and at one time had a Level 2 unit that was closed this year to free up space. It has a total capacity of 2,440 inmates. The Saginaw Correctional Facility houses Level 4 and Level 5 inmates and opened in 1993. Oaks Correctional Facility, originally a high-security Level 5 housing facility for high-risk offenders, it now houses Level 2 and Level 4 inmates, with a prisoner capacity of 1,108. The Marquette Branch Prison opened in 1889. Making it the oldest Michigan DOC prison still in operation. In 1921, the 6th warden of that prison, Theodore Burr Catlin, was appointed. Soon after his appointment, a grand jury began investigating the prison, and the chief clerk was found guilty of embezzling funds. Then, in September of that year, 3 prisoners escaped. The first was Arthur Gypsy Bob Harper, who hopped the fence. This was the first escape in 17 years. 10 days later, 2 other convicts escaped over the same fence by using a ladder they made from scrap lumber found in the prison yard. All 3 convicts were eventually caught and returned to the facility. But that was not the end of Gypsy Bob's escapades. Not long after, on December 11, 1921, he and 2 other convicts, Jasper Perry and Charles Roberts, attacked Warden Catlin and Deputy Fred Menenhent and the deputy's son Arthur, as well as prison guard Charles Anderson, in the prison movie theater. The 3 convicts were armed with knives and stabbed their 4 unsuspecting victims numerous times. The main target was the warden, who managed to close himself off in a room until other prison guards were able to restore order and detain the 3 attackers. All 4 victims eventually died from complications caused by the stabbing wounds. The attackers were flogged on 3 different occasions. At that time, the punishment of flogging was approved by the governor in certain cases, such as this. The murder case was eventually dismissed because the court stated that flogging had served as their punishment and that they could not legally be punished again because that would be double jeopardy. 3 prisoners remained at the prison and served out their life sentences with no further punishment for that case. On April 20th, 1952, a pair of maximum security prisoners overpowered a guard and took his keys. They then released hundreds of fellow inmates. This began 5 days of rioting that ended the life of 1 prisoner and caused millions of dollars in damage. The events that kicked off the riot were said to be inmates' complaints of subpar food and living conditions, and they claimed that they also were physically abused often by the guards. All these simmering feelings came to a boil when the inmates heard about another riot in New Jersey around the same time. The inmates attempted to break out of Marquette Prison by taking then-Governor G. Menon Soapy Williams hostage, but the attempt failed. When inmates spoke to the media about what they described as physical abuse from the guards, Governor Williams blamed budget cuts by the Republican-led legislature, and the GOP state chair, Owen Clearly, blamed Williams for his mismanagement of the entire Michigan correction system. Eventually, a list of demands was printed in a local newspaper, and the prisoners agreed to return to their cell blocks. This uprising was the inspiration of the 1954 film Riot in Cell Block 11, and famed movie director Quentin Tarantino called it the best prison movie ever made. There was another uprising that occurred on May 22nd, 1981, whereby about 200 incarcerated individuals had remained on the yard after recall. 15 minutes later, when inmates were not released for their lunch at 11 p.m. and instead were locked down to conduct a shakedown and weapons search, it made them very upset. Evidently, Warden Barry Mitzes arrived at Jackson Prison and told the staff to halt their planned lockdown. Rumors had started spreading that the prison was going to be on lockdown for the entire Memorial Day weekend, which meant that they would not be granted any privileges, such as recreation time, family visits, etc. By 2:30 in the afternoon, cell blocks 3 and 4 had been released, and inmates started moving towards blocks 5 and 8. In response, rifle squads had been sent to those blocks beforehand to contain the uprising, and at approximately 1:10 p.m., a gun squad secured those housing blocks. At this time, Deputy Warden Elton Scott offered the inmates to bring forward grievances. However, none was forwarded. Instead, the inmates set small fires and did some damage to 2 of the housing units. By 7:45 in the evening, Deputy Warden Elton Scott ordered unarmed guards to replace the gun squads, and Warden Mitzes told the inmates over the loudspeaker, with a message that basically stated that staff were not interested in retaliations. They just wanted them to lock up and to restore order. But the inmates were locked down for the rest of the weekend. While all of these events occurred, the central complex of Jackson Prison also had an uprising in the North Complex. Inmates there set fires and looted and chanted threats against the guards. In total, approximately 1,700 inmates were involved, with 8 injuries being reported and multiple buildings damaged. More than 160 state police officers were mobilized, and the National Guard was put on alert. Reserve guards from the Michigan Reformatory were called in as reinforcements. 5 days later, on May 27, 1981, a second uprising occurred at the Jackson prison. There were no hostages and no fatalities during this uprising. However, 165 state police officers and 200 guards were called in to squash the riot. Staff safety continues to be an issue in Michigan Department of Corrections. We don't have enough level 5 bed space to accommodate keeping them all where they're supposed to be, Brian Osborne, Michigan Correction Organization president, said. Of the prison system's highest security level, it's a big safety concern for us. Representatives for the Michigan Department of Corrections did not respond to press requests for further comment on the situation. This is very typical of many agencies across the U.S. who try to hide problems or underreact to staff concerns and grievances, as well as those of the inmates. The way a lot of administrators look at it, they feel they'll just wait it out until the heat passes over. And if they get sued, many of them have told me they don't care because they'll be retired by then and it won't affect them. Even though you can be personally sued for liability, that rarely happens. But regardless, taxpayers usually foot the bill for this type of deliberate indifference. On January 6, 2026, a state inmate went to the chow hall at the wrong time and ignored orders to return to his cell. He then ended up getting into a confrontation and punching one officer and choking another before other officers subdued him. The inmate, 48-year-old Danielle Thomas, was housed at the Cotton Correctional Facility near Jackson and had more than 100 previous misconduct reports on his record, including 9 assaults on prison staff and 6 on fellow prisoners, with the most recent assaults committed a couple years earlier. Officials had classified him as a level 4 prisoner, the second highest security level, but he was reclassified to level 2, which is the second lowest security level, and they cited lack of bed space, a Freedom of Information Act request showed. This is an issue in many parts of the U.S., as state governments have often experienced a drop in inmate population in recent years due to a variety of factors, such as early releases for COVID-19 cases, inmates being released based on new laws, and refiguration of the release dates, etc., as well as other efforts to try and reduce inmate populations by reclassifying them to lower security facilities, often called consolidation, in order to save money by closing some housing units or sometimes even entire prisons. Due to this, some high-risk prisoners may be moved from higher security places to other units not built to deal with them, and they may take advantage of this to beat the system by placing staff and other inmates' safety at risk. Organized crime and street gangs have long been a part of Michigan's history. The Detroit Purple Gang, also known as the Sugar House Gang, was a criminal mob of bootleggers and hijackers, comprised predominantly of Jewish gangsters. They mainly operated in Detroit during the 1920s Prohibition era and came to be the city's dominant criminal gang. But excessive violence and infighting caused the group to destroy itself by the 1930s. It was known that in 1929 there were at least 25,000 illegal saloons in Detroit, and the Purple Gang supplied many of them. They were such a force that Chicago gangster Al Capone decided against expanding his rackets to Detroit and instead worked out compromise business deals in order to prevent a bloody war. For many years, the gang managed to sneak in Canadian whiskey into the United States, which was then sent on to Chicago for Capone's outfit. And the Purple Gang is alleged to have been responsible for at least 500 murders within the greater Detroit area. They also were suspected of taking part in the St. Valentine's Day Massacre in Chicago. A Purple Gang gangster named Abe Bernstein reportedly called Bugs Moran to tell them that a hijacked load of booze was on its way to Chicago. Moran, who was in the middle of his turf war with Capone, trusted Bernstein, who previously had been Capone's chief supplier of Canadian liquor. But it may have been a setup. The next day, four men, two of them in police uniforms, went into one of Moran's Northside hangouts and opened fire with Thompson submachine guns, killing 7 men. Moran managed to keep control of much of his territory, but the Northside gang never fully recovered from this incident. For many years, the Purple Gang enjoyed almost complete immunity from local police interference, so many believe that the cops were paid off. But eventually, they became more arrogant and sloppy, which caused public outcry, and the police eventually moved against them, as members began leaving behind too much evidence of their crimes. The gang continued for a few years in diminished capacity, but Detroit's modern-day Italian Mafia stepped in more and more to fill the void. In 1954, the Detroit Red Wings played against some convicts at Marquette Branch Prison. The Purple Gang was said to have organized the game via 2 of their leaders there doing time. Detroit Red Wings was led by Gordie Howe, Ted Lindsay, and Terry Sawchuk, as they played the worst team they would ever face, a squad of convicted killers and robbers. Knowing that the prison didn't have a team or even an ice rink, the Red Wings agreed to play the convicts, as a quickly constructed ice rink was set up for the event. February 2nd, 1954, it was very chilly, 21 degrees outside, overcast, no wind, a perfect day for hockey. It isn't clear to me who won that game, but it would make sense to me that the Red Wings probably let the Cons win, just out of respect. 10 weeks later, the Red Wings were crowned the Stanley Cup champions after defeating Montreal, and nobody cheered louder than the inmates at Marquette Prison. Detroit's hoods saw an influx of gangsters and street hustlers in the 1970s. Transition from the Italian mob, also known as the Detroit Partnership, who had been in power since Prohibition and at first were lesser players than the Purple Gang. Blaze Marzette was one of the first legends of the underworld. Marzette lit up the landscape all around him. That's why they called him Blaze. Previously, he was a decorated Detroit Police Department narcotics squad cop before going to state prison for extorting drug dealers and reinventing himself as Motown's Black Godfather. Emerging from the penitentiary in the early 1960s, he rose in power in just a few short years, establishing drug, gambling, and extortion rackets all across the city. His battle for control was brutal. It is said that Blaze and his organization were involved in more than 150 deaths in less than 20 months. He died of kidney failure on April 10, 1972, at the early age of 45, as new hungry crime lords took over Detroit streets during the 1970s. During the 1980s, the crack cocaine era led to an increase in black street crews, such as Big Ed's, D. Holloway's, Maserati Ricks, and the Pony Down through Powell Brothers and the Chamber Brothers. It's my understanding that when hardcore street gang members enter Michigan DOC, they will typically gravitate towards umbrella associations inside prison or closely linked to their street gang association. For example, if an offender was associated with a street gang that had blood links, that offender would gravitate towards a blood set even if there were none on the yard from his specific set, such as Headbanger Bloods, Sex Money Murder Bloods, Treetop Pyrus, Nine Tray Gangster Bloods, etc. Offenders who were associated with vice lords on the street would likely stay within the same house on the inside, no matter if they're conservative, traveler, mafia insane vice lords, etc. There are many security threat groups seen within Michigan DOC, such as homegrown Detroit money cliques like Cashflow Posse, homegrown sets such as Villain Banger Mafia Bloods, gangster disciples, originally out of Chicago, as well as black gangster disciples who may ride with Crips. There are four-corner hustlers, Latin counts, Latin kings, insane Spanish cobras, some Cali gangsters such as Sureños and an occasional norteño, outlaw biker groups, as well as white supremacist groups. When we return next time, we'll talk about more security threat groups in Michigan prisons, as well as street gangs and other security threat groups operating on the mean streets of Detroit. For now, this is Gabe Morales signing off for gangsters, cops, and politicians.